Great. So that was a smooth transition, and that's all what we are about, smooth transitions. Hopefully, the energy transition goes as smoothly. Welcome to the panel on robust methane emissions monitoring and reduction. It's quite a bit of a mouthful, but we've got a great panel here. We've got Zubin, who comes in from the financing side, and in fact, a fair bit of work that World Bank is also doing on tracking, etc. as well, right? And we've got Atul, who comes in from some of the what we would call usual suspect sides in terms of the methane consumption and potential emissions. But of course, a lot of good work that Total is doing around that. And we've got Rahul, who again comes from the producing but also solution side in terms of both fossil fuel production, but potentially some of the carbon solutions that we're looking after. But afternoon to the audience here. I know it's always difficult to have a post-lunch session, but we'll try to keep an engaging dialogue over the next 25 odd minutes. I'll start off with kind of just painting a picture of what we are really seeing when we talk about methane emissions, right? So I think IEA in its outlook highlighted that close to 350 million tons of methane emissions have happened in 2024, which is a lot, right? And the energy sector within that accounts for close to more than one third of that, right? So 120, 130 odd million tons. Large parts of it is flaring, which we'll kind of talk about today, because you can't have fossil fuels. And it's not something that you can really cap on. Once you produce it, either you pump it, use it, or it's out in the system, right? And so it seems the most natural and easiest way to address. But again, sometimes the easier said things are the more difficult ones, right? So, given the amount of methane, emissions that are happening, it's not that efforts are not being made. There is fair bit of work that is happening through the GFMR system and tracking that is in place, the global methane tracker system that is there. There is work that is happening on carbon sequestration that is happening uh, to some degree of tracking. So with that, I'm going to start with a simple question, Zubin, with you, and we'll kind of go around the panel around how do you see, and of course we'll come to the financing portion, but how do you see efforts being made in first seeing where this emission is happening, right? Because we all know methane is more potent as a greenhouse gas compared to just sheer CO2, right? One simple answer would be to burn it or incinerate, and we'll come to that. But before we come to solutions, how do we just track it and see where is it, and basically hotspot identifications, right? And what, unless you know it, unless you see it, you can't really do much about it. So maybe starting off with that on your thoughts, Zubin, how you seeing it across the world and World Bank's efforts.
Sure. So thank you, Manas, and thank you to the organizers for having us and inviting us. So the whole issue with methane is that the technologies to detect and quantify methane are relatively new, right? So this was not something that the oil and gas industry was thinking about 20, 30 years ago, maybe somewhere, but not to the extent they are today. And let me start by saying that often in the oil and gas industry, and also just methane writ large, what we see is the attention and the whole issue is framed within the climate agenda, right? That's bad for the climate. And I'd like to turn that around a little bit. Of course, that is an important part of methane reduction efforts to address the climate impacts. But for many countries in which the World Bank works, that's not what resonates with the operators, with the communities in which the oil and gas companies are operating. And what resonates is the economic impact, right? So you talk about finance. I would like to, propose that the way we should frame this is fourfold. You've got the climate impacts, which are important. Then you've got the economic impacts. And let me start by saying the economic impacts can be substantive. So, for example, in Southeast Asia, ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, we cooperated with the ASEAN Center for Energy to do some analytical work of methane emissions in the region. And we discovered that some 80% or so of these methane reduction projects would be at net negative cost. So it's not. It's important that operators recognize that this is an opportunity. It's not just simply the fact that you're going to lose money, trying to repair your infrastructure, compressor stations, or whatever it is, you're losing money, and you will probably generate money if you address your methane emissions. So, for example, we're working with an operator in the Central Asian region just now, and we did some initial surveys, and we detected leaks, and we're able to repair them, very quickly, and then quantify that in terms of the gas price, depending on what you use, Henry Hub or whatever. And the operator and the government there was just thrilled when they saw that how much money they would keep within their system and how much gas would remain in the system that they could sell. And so what we turned around and said is, okay, we with our new trust fund at the World Bank, what we'd like to do is continue to help you. But once you start seeing the money that's generated from keeping your gas in the system, please put aside a percentage of that to continuously monitor and do the leak detection and repair campaigns, or LDAR campaigns as they're known, for a long-term programmatic approach. Back to your question about the detection. Satellites are helpful to get an initial look at where your methane plumes and fugitive methane emissions are. But then you have to do a lot of work verifying, and we're learning this as well, is that once you get closer to the source, so whether it's drones, aerial surveys, handheld devices, OGI cameras, whatever it is, you really need to verify it, because often these estimates that we see about how much methane from oil and gas is not going to be the final result. So this is really what the issue is. Now that we're getting the technology, operators recognize it's not just a climate issue, it's also an economic issue, it's also an energy security issue. Many countries like Europe looking for additional supplies of gas. You could take the 150 or so BCM flared around the world and generate enough power for the entire African continent. So, it's just a monumental waste. And then the fourth aspect of methane and flaring reduction is, of course, energy access. So for us at the World Bank, we recognize there's 500 million people or so still without basic access to electricity, many of them in Africa, but also in other parts of the world. And a country like Nigeria flares a lot of gas, and just a few feet or yards away from a village that has no access to electricity, you see these flares. So this juxtaposition is, when you go there and you see it, and people ask you, why does this persist in the industry after 160 years of this going on? It's time to end the practice, right? Anyway, that's why we're working.
No, absolutely. And the word that comes to mind is criminal waste when you do that juxtaposition, right? You have flaring at one side, and there is a house nearby which doesn't have 24/7 electricity, right? So so that is the sheer economics. In a sense, one is potentially burning money, right, if you were to look
Absolutely.
at it that way. But you said some very interesting points of the detection part first at the satellite level, and then a close by, because that's where the true estimation would happen, and some of the solutions coming to that. So Atul, coming to you again from your perspective, things that Total is doing in terms of across, again, it's a global operations, right? But you can touch upon India as well in terms of emissions that you as an organizations are looking at and tracking, and what do you really see coming in, which can get a better sense, a landscape of where are we emitting, and then maybe we can talk a little bit about solutions to address it.
Okay. So over the years, TotalEnergies has committed to reduce its emissions, especially the methane emissions by 2030, and to be carbon neutral by 2050. That's the ambition. Our purpose is to provide affordable, reliable, and sustainable energy to as many people as possible. But the challenge is always remains how to decarbonize the energy. At industry level, at country level, it's a methane pledge that should be, seen as a keen driver to drive this decarbonization journey further. There are more than 150 countries. They signed a methane pledge to reduce the methane emissions by 30% by 2030. However, if you look at the progress, is not that great. At industry level also, there are many initiatives. Mars, for example, methane alert and response system, which is using more than 12 satellites and sending alerts. So I think there were more than 3,000 alerts were sent to the countries as well as the companies over a few years. Uh, then, as you were mentioning, global flare tracking. So that also plays a important role to move us forward. Again, TotalEnergies is committed to eliminate flaring by 2030, and we have drastically reduced our emissions more than 50% from the level of 2020 till 2025. We also believe that robust monitoring, I mean, a starting point should be a base level measurement to get, I mean, as Zubin was mentioning. So it's important that we know, and then there are several technology exist. Satellite-based technology, your handheld meters, and TotalEnergies. I'm very proud to share that we have developed a technology in association with French National Research Institute. We call it as AUSIA, which is nothing but airborne ultralight spectrometer for environmental application. And it not only detects the emission level, but it also can quantify so where we stand, and that helps further to start the journey on the decarbonization. So there are several solutions exist. They are cost effective as well, but that commitment has to be there. As we were discussing, one side we are flaring, and one side there is no access to the energy, uh, which is in a way crime. So look at LDR campaigns, but going outside hydrocarbon energy also. Water resource management for rice field, for example, capping the abandoned wells, then waste to energy. I mean, these initiatives has to be sustained and continuously drive. And we will talk about how, I mean, financing and what are the practical difficulties these solutions might have. Thank
No,
you.
no, absolutely, you're right. Thanks, Atul. I think it's good to see Total's focus on it, and I think some move towards implementation. I think this spectrometer that you mentioned, that's a portable spectrometer that you're saying, right? That can,
Yeah.
or is that
So
as a in situ?
so it's made to the need.
Okay.
Okay. So OGMP2 requires site level monitoring,
Hmm.
and to meet, and also I'm happy to share that we are maintaining OGMP2 gold standard since last 5 years.
Very nice.
And AUSIA, this technology which I was explaining, is key contributor to that. So this tool basically scans the area around asset, and it can measure the emissions up to the ppm level, which is I mean today pre-industrially mm, post industry revolution, the ppm level has reached to as high as to 2 ppm compared to the pre-industry era, which was half of that, less than 1 ppm. I think around 720 ppb. So this sensor is that sensitive that it can detect emission at ppm level, and not only that, it can quantify the emissions coming out of the site. That really helps site to identify their plan to progress further on it.
Oh, perfect. And we'll talk maybe a
Yeah.
little bit about such solutions. Coming to you, Rahul, again, maybe starting with some of the work that you do at Transcontinental, you're of course supporting in some of the production, but you're also looking at, how we can address some of the flaring as you produce. So maybe your thoughts on, you've been in parts of this industry, you've also been on the financing side of things. How do you set up projects such that you are able to ensure that the emissions are minimized, flaring is hopefully addressed and potentially utilized and not just incinerated. How are some of those trends that you're seeing and your company is working on in terms of, as an oil field service provider, with many of the oil producing companies, what are some of those trends that you're seeing in methane tracking, designing for abatement?
So we've taken a very different approach. We are mostly in the upstream sector. What we look at is how can we help operators monitorize methane emissions? This is a very there has to be an incentive which is presented to operators for them to invest in the technology and advancement of the technology. No operator today is interested just dumping money for unnecessary no monetized technology. There are, I mean, I wouldn't say all, but a lot of them, I would say globally. And what we are doing is we're designing techniques and procedures around how can you monitorize methane emissions practically. So give an example for a operator in Middle East. What we're doing is we're incinerating gas. The aim behind it is they're not receiving direct dollar to dollar for a trade of methane emission, but it actually cuts their 4 month lead time in terms of taking permits from the city, from the villages they're operating into, from the nearby habitat they're operating into. So that is helping them monetize their gas or their oil 4 months in ahead of time, which is a massive uptake for them. So we are basically designing procedures for and and equipment around this kind of footprint where there is always an idea that it helps you monetize your production ahead of time, proper, uh, in an efficient way. So our program is more embodied into their well testing division. So it's the cost is very similar to a flaring cost, which is there is little bit of an upcharge, but it's a very similar cost. So what it does is it allows them to make justification for their budget. And this is our primary goal always when we get down on a well testing location or any kind of a production location. Overall, we are also helping them to cover their ESG parts very properly. We are helping them to ensure that the entire problems oriented to flaring, where there is habitat, where there is villages, is solved. And the idea is for transcontinental is to invest more and more into methane and emission-free technologies moving ahead. Most of operators and partners we work globally with, they are realizing that the younger generation, the Gen Zs and the below Gen Zs are now asking for no emissions. There is protest behind this. There's lots of noise around it, and uh, the every service company today, a service provider, has realized it that if they don't invest in technologies which are oriented to emissions, they will be falling behind in the marketplace. And the idea is electrification, emission reduction. These are the two basic ideas which Transcontinental has embodied itself in the R&D sector of its own. We are in a process to convert our entire frac fleets, our workover units, all engines we have in the company practically into an electrification basis. Uh, we have turned around and are converting entire flare stacks in our company into incineration basis. And our 80% R&D budget today is focused on emissions. So the whole wrap up is today's focus has become for any E&P company as well has become an emission controlled E&P operators, which is very, very, very important. The idea of cowboying ESG reports, I would say, underreporting methane emissions is actually fading away from the marketplace today. And responsibility, robust strategy, proper roadmap for decarbonization, I think these are the new language which has been embodied in the American ENP for sure, 100%.
No, perfect. And I think I really like what you said, emissions controlled ENP production. That's probably in a sense the manna, right? I mean, you want energy, but you want it in a fashion that is sustainable, right? And that's really useful. I'll just quickly again circle back to you, Zubin. All of these are interesting, right? But whether it's incineration, whether it's some of the detection and spectrometry that he's talking about, but these cost, right? Rahul talked about monetization of non-monetized asset. Flaring is essentially non-monetization, right? I mean, there is an economics to it, but let's not go there. How can we finance some of these initiatives? last, one of a PwC IEA report talked about of the entire climate finance, which by the way is not enough for required for this. Of that, close to 5-6% only
Yeah.
goes into this, right?
Right,
So,
right, yeah.
why? Because this seems the most easiest part, and what really more can be done on the financing for such initiatives?
Yeah, so let me just not assume people are familiar with what the World Bank has done on this agenda over the last few years. We actually used to have a small trust fund at the World Bank that was focused just on gas flaring. It was only a few $1 million, and all we could do with that was provide some technical assistance to emerging markets. Raise the visibility of the problem, say, here's something you should do, look at technological, regulatory solutions, that sort of thing. Fortunately, at COP28 in Dubai, we announced a new trust fund supported by TotalEnergies, BP, Eni, the major companies, plus some governments like the United States, Norway, the UAE, to have a new trust fund with a lot more money, around $250 million. The idea being that the technologies are out there now to do methane abatement and flaring reduction. There are good regulatory best practices, some of which we show on our website. We look at some 31 jurisdictions. You can do a comparative analysis as well to see what seems to be working. So the solutions are there for that. What is missing, as you said, is the finance side, right? Which is always the case. Why is it always about money? Uh, so, so what we said is we went to our management of the World Bank and said, look, this is an opportunity. The reason why the World Bank should focus on this is in the developing world. They just don't have the resources and the capacity to address this issue, which touches not on just on climate, but economics, revenue, like I said, energy security as well as energy access. So it's a very good issue for the World Bank, and people recognize that this is a good opportunity. And so we started with this new trust fund, the idea being that the World Bank would provide grant funding for projects. So we get a lot of requests from governments. Can you help us with our regulatory policies, update them? What are the technologies out there? We'll continue to do that type of work where we think it makes sense. But our board, what we call our steering committee, is really saying, could you guys please just focus on doing the projects themselves? Use the money for grant to get them jump started, get them on this journey, and then what we will also do is look for the concessional or commercial financing to close the gap when we're doing these projects. So if the World Bank doesn't do it, we as a team at the World Bank will go out and go to the JP Morgans or whatever bank. And there are many banks actually in New York and other parts of the world that are actually very excited about doing methane. So things are coming together. The ecosystem is coming about into a good shape or form. And that's what we hope to do. So again, we'll provide some grant funding for doing LDAR campaigns, leak detection and repair campaigns. And then hopefully what we also want to do is some flaring projects. We'll put in a few $1 million or whatever makes sense, and then seek out the rest of the funding. And then what we want to do is try and replicate, scale up, and then share this as best practices globally to all the operators, so that they recognize again that there's an opportunity for them as a company or as an operator. And lo and behold, this has gained some traction. So as I mentioned, there's one Central Asian country that we're working in now. When other countries in the region heard about what we were doing with them, they said, that sounds reasonable and smart, we'd like to do it. Then they saw, as Rahul and Atul was saying, if you monetize it and show them the economic impacts, I think you get good action on the ground. Finance is coming together. It's kind of a lagging sort of component, but hopefully we'll work with other organizations. And I said, we talk to banks all the time about funding projects and understanding what they're looking for. So hopefully we'll solve that problem.
No, you're right. I mean, eventually, one is, of course, it all goes back to economics, but the initial finance is the kickstart, right? As you said, be the grant for the leak detection, and then even blended financing, as you said, right?
Yes.
You could do that. Coming to you, Atul, on that, I think a lot. I mean, Total obviously has relatively deep pockets, right? So I mean, you could fund your own projects, but do you look at, while World Bank, of course, has a mandate to fund such projects, do you look at partnerships, tie-ups, and financing for these kind of things? Because it also is an avenue for some of your R&D investments as well,
Yeah,
right?
we
Is there
we,
some such?
we
Yeah.
ourselves invest very heavily in R&D and these technologies, and I mean in various sectors. For if I take an example of Mars LNG, our Oman plant, which is upcoming. I mean that could be the first plant or one of the very few plant that will be completely designed with renewable energy, and with the emissions 10 times lesser than what the conventional plant could be. At recent COP30, our chairman announced $100 million for climate initiatives. We have been spending. The technology, which I mean, we recently had a few projects in India with some of our strategic partner. So, I mean, as a oil and gas decarbonization charter member, we supply the technology. I mean, it's not we don't commercialize this kind of technology application to the society. So that it's a good example of how the shared values can and the good collaboration can come up with, and using the cutting edge technology like Ozia that can really give you the good insight of the emissions of the asset. Uh, so yeah, so we are still committed, and we continue along with Abu Dhabi and ADNOC and other companies to fund the climate initiatives.
No, absolutely. One is, of course, the technology investment, and also, as you said, how you scale that up. And as you said, Patrick was also here, I think, and the whole funding that you're looking at for
Yeah.
your investments and other startups would be useful. Coming to you, Rahul, in terms of just quickly on many of these projects that you're setting up are essentially around, either incineration or emissions abatement. Uh, can they be self-funding, which is the easy part? Maybe not, which is where financing comes in. How are you currently targeting that?
So that is the major part of the success when it comes to methane amendment or any kind of a green initiative we take. The problem in today's world is number one, oil and gas sector, specifically service sector, is in a high risk consideration when it comes to financing and bank financing. Second is the payback on equipment, payback on manpower is lot more longer in a green initiative or a methane amendment initiative than on a regular process what we have. So we are working with financial partners who understand these challenges, who are okay to invest for a longer term, ability to take that risk for a longer term. We request most of our strategies are designed behind operators who have ability to provide long term contracts. So we are de-risking the finance part of it, and that's our bottom line strategy. Work with operators who are serious in emissions and emission standards, who have ability to provide long-term contracts. Work with banks and financing partners who have ability to take that risk, de-risk on the basis of a longer contracts, and make sure that we can monetize these services.
Sure. No, so I think that's a very important. I think the point of having an ecosystem and the choice of partners, right? That makes the thing that much more easier in terms of the choice of projects, the partners you work with, and then you have the same sustainability values and vision. Time is up, but I'll just go maybe the reverse order back, Rahul, starting with you. Your last thoughts of where do you really see methane abatement and emissions reduction happen? What is the one thing that you would like to, bring into play so that we are able to make a substantial change? Half a minute.
What I like to see in today's world is from a very so we deal with a lot of private equity players who have funded companies who are coming up who have 100,000 barrels, 200,000 barrels in production. They are not very serious when it comes to ESG reports and methane amendments because their private equity is not very serious. But those private equities have very deep pockets. And if they get more serious in their ESG reports, they get more serious in terms of environmental concerns, and and they look for more brighter tomorrow, because their tomorrow is only going to be brighter when the next generation comes and invest in them. And that is what we look at it, that we need to have more seriousness in the marketplace in terms of operators, in terms of financing, and in terms of service providers, all of it. This ecosystem can only come in place properly if the whole dome has an ability and has a discipline to follow it. If one doesn't and other does, it fails the process, and
Absolutely.
nobody can do anything about it at that point. So the idea is operators, service providers, financing companies, banks, and the entire stakeholders, they all need to come together.
Got it. So the interconnected loop, starting potentially with some financier education. Your wish list, Atul, in terms of what would you look at in the next
Yeah, what
four
I
to
would
five?
like to
Yeah.
see is a common platform for transport, for transparent reporting, from voluntary disclosure to mandatory disclosures. OGMP too, still a very comprehensive framework. And if you look at, not many Indian companies are member of
Signed up.
OGMP too. So this already a platform is available. So we have to come together as an industry and work together to further towards shared goal and vision.
Build momentum and get participation
Yeah.
going. Zubin, your one thing to change.
Yeah, I mean, so many things, but I would say, look, when we do this annual State of Global Flaring report, the World Bank publishes it every year. This past year, the main message we wanted to say is like the only thing missing besides the finance, and even that now is not missing so much, is the political will. I think, Atul, you mentioned it, right? The leadership has to recognize that even if you think this isn't something that's economically viable for you in your operated assets, I recognize that there are regulations coming, and more jurisdictions will put in regulations that are going to make flaring and fugitive methane emissions far more costly than it is to actually continue this industry practice. So just do something about it, show some leadership, and especially in countries like India, which all four of us are from,
Yep.
we want this to end, not just because of the climate, but because people need energy. People don't want to waste money, and people want to live good, productive lives using a natural resource rather than wastefully flaring it. So let's see if we can do this together.
Absolutely, with a lovely thought to end. So, get the energy that we are emitting, and can we use it for energy security and consumption? Thank you for the lovely panel. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Round
you.
of applause.